My family called me a failure for years, but when I became a millionaire, they begged for help. Growing up, I learned early that I was the disappointment, the one who never measured up, the one who was always falling short. My parents made sure I knew it, and my siblings, the golden ones, never let me forget. My older brother, Ethan, was the star athlete. My sister, Rachel, was the straight-A genius. And then there was me, the lost cause. It wasn't just words. It was the looks, the size, the constant comparisons. If I struggled in school, I wasn't trying hard enough. If I had an idea for something different, something that wasn't a real job, I was being delusional. I remember sitting at the dinner table one night, my father's voice cold as he said, "Some people just aren't meant for success. You need to accept that." My mother nodded in agreement. "Rachel and Ethan are going to make something of themselves. But you'll be lucky if you can pay rent." I believed them for a long time, too long. But something inside me refused to die. Maybe it was spite. Maybe it was survival. I didn't go to college like they wanted. Instead, I threw myself into building something of my own. It was messy, uncertain, everything they feared. I worked brutal hours, failed more times than I could count, sacrificed sleep, stability, relationships. I clawed my way up, one painful step at a time, and somehow, I made it. At 28, I became a self-made millionaire. My business took off, opportunities opened, and suddenly, the kid who was never going to make it had more success than the golden children combined. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need them. And that's when they came back. It started with a text from my mother, short, casual, as if we had just spoken last week instead of years ago. "Hey sweetheart, how have you been? We miss you. Let's have dinner soon." I stared at my phone, the words almost laughable. "Miss me?" The last real conversation we had was when she told me I was wasting my life. Now, out of nowhere, she wanted to reconnect. Then came my father, his message more direct. "Let's put the past behind us. Family is family. Call me." It didn't take long to figure out what was really going on. Ethan had lost his job. Rachel was drowning in debt from medical school. My parents were struggling with their mortgage. And suddenly, the failure they had written off was the only one who could save them. The first dinner was a disaster. I walked into my childhood home, a place filled with ghosts of every insult. Every moment I was made to feel small. My mother greeted me with forced warmth, hugging me like she hadn't spent years tearing me down. My father gave me a stiff handshake, his eyes scanning me like he was trying to recalculate who I had become. Rachel and Ethan were already seated, both smiling, but it wasn't real. They made small talk, acting as if nothing had happened. No apologies, no acknowledgement of the years of ridicule. Then, halfway through dinner, my father cleared his throat and said, "So, tell us about your business." I almost laughed. There it was, the reason they had invited me back. Not to reconnect, not because they regretted how they treated me, but because they needed my money. And the worst part, they didn't even bother to hide it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the people who had spent years making me feel like I was worth nothing. Now they sat across from me, suddenly interested in my success, pretending like the past never happened. My father was watching me closely, waiting for me to say something about my business. My mother kept giving me polite smiles, but I could see it in her eyes. She was nervous. And Rachel, she wasn't even pretending. She looked irritated, like she was forcing herself to be here. I took a slow sip of my drink before answering. "Business is good." That's all I gave them. I wasn't about to spill my life story just because they had decided I was worth talking to now. My father nodded, drumming his fingers on the table. "That's great. Really great. You know, your mother and I always knew you had potential." I almost choked on my drink. "They always knew?" I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. "Right. That's why you spent my entire childhood telling me I'd never amount to anything?" The table went silent. My mother shifted uncomfortably, her forced smile faltering. "Sweetheart, that was years ago. We were just trying to push you in the right direction." Rachel scoffed under her breath. "Oh, here we go." I turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "Something to say?" She crossed her arms. "Yeah. You're acting like a victim. You made it, didn't you? So what does it matter?" I felt something inside me snap. It matters because I had to do it alone. Because while you and Ethan got support, I got told I was a disappointment. Because I spent years thinking you were right, thinking I was nothing. And now, the second you all need me, I'm suddenly family again. Ethan, who had been silent all night, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was something calculating about it. "Look, we all said things we didn't mean, but at the end of the day, we're still family. And family helps each other, right?" There it was, the ask. I set my fork down. "So this is why I'm here. You want money?" My father sighed like this conversation was exhausting him. We're not asking for handouts, son. We just thought, given your success, you might want to invest in your family's future. Rachel perked up. Right, like, maybe you could help with my student loans. Just a little. Nothing crazy. My mother placed a hand on mine, her voice soft, almost pleading. The house has been difficult to keep up with. We just need a little help getting back on our feet. I looked around the table. Not one of them actually cared about me. Not one of them had apologized. They weren't here to fix anything. They were here to use me. And the worst part, they didn't even feel bad about it. I sat back and exhaled. Then I said the words I had waited my whole life to say. No. The air in the room shifted. My mother blinked like she hadn't heard me right. My father's jaw clenched. Rachel let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. Wow. Seriously? I shrugged. Seriously. Ethan leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. Come on, man. Don't be like that. We're your family. I stared at him for a long moment. Funny. You weren't my family when I was struggling. You weren't my family when I was working 16-hour days, barely scraping by. You weren't my family when I needed support. But now that I'm successful, now you remember me? My father exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. We raised you. You wouldn't be where you are without us. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're right. I wouldn't be where I am without you, but not because you helped me, because you forced me to prove you wrong. Rachel's face twisted with disgust. God, you are so full of yourself. You think you're better than us now, just because you made some money? I turned to her, my expression unreadable. No, Rachel. I don't think I'm better than you. I know I am. That did it. She shot up from her chair, shoving it back so hard it nearly tipped over. Screw this. I don't need anything from you. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the front door behind her. Ethan sighed and ran a hand through his hair, muttering, Rachel. Then he turned back to me, his voice lower, more controlled. Look, man, just think about it. Okay? Don't be a stubborn. But it wasn't friendly. No need to think about it. My answer's still no. He sighed, shaking his head. Whatever. He got up and left without another word. Now, it was just my parents. My mother's eyes were glassy, but I couldn't tell if she was actually upset or just angry she didn't get what she wanted. My father looked at me like I was a stranger. Finally, he spoke. This is the path you want to take? Walking away from your own blood. I met his gaze, my voice steady. You walked away from me a long time ago. My mother wiped at her eyes, sniffling. You'll regret this. I pushed my chair back and stood. No, I won't. And with that, I walked out of that house, feeling lighter than I had in years. The cold night air hit me, sharp and refreshing, washing away the stale bitterness that clung to my skin from that dinner table. I should have felt angry. I should have been hurt. But the truth was, I felt free. For the first time, I wasn't chasing their approval. I wasn't waiting for them to see me, to respect me, to love me the way they should have all along. I had won, and they knew it. I got into my car, gripping the steering wheel as I stared at my childhood home in the rearview mirror. It looked the same, but it wasn't. It wasn't my home anymore. It was just a house where I had been raised, where I had been shaped by their cruelty. And now, I was finally leaving it behind. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I sighed, expecting another message from Rachel or Ethan. Maybe my mother trying to guilt me into changing my mind. But when I pulled it out, I frowned. It wasn't them. It was my Aunt Linda. Hey, honey, I heard you were in town. Can we meet up? I have something I need to tell you. Aunt Linda, my mother's older sister, the one person in my family who had ever treated me like I mattered. She lived out of state, so I hadn't seen her in years, but she had always been kind to me growing up. And if she wanted to talk, it wasn't just for small talk. Something was wrong. I stared at the message for a long time before finally replying. Yeah, when and where? She responded almost immediately. Tomorrow morning. My hotel, I'll text you the address. I didn't know why, but my gut told me this wasn't just about catching up, and I was right. The next morning, I met Aunt Linda at a small cafe inside her hotel. She looked the same sharp, put together, but with warmth in her eyes. The moment she saw me, she pulled me into a hug, a real one. Not the forced, calculating embrace my mother had given me the night before. It's good to see you, sweetheart, she said, squeezing my arms before stepping back to study me. You've changed. I smirked. Yeah, money tends to do that. She let out a small laugh but didn't deny it. Then she motioned for me to sit. I ordered coffee. She got tea. And for a few moments, we just sat there. I could tell she was choosing her words carefully. Finally, she sighed and said, I heard about dinner last night. I raised an eyebrow. Already? Let me guess. Mom called you, crying about how I'm selfish and ungrateful? Aunt Linda didn't answer right away. Instead, she stirred her tea, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up and said, "I need to tell you something about your parents." Something in her tone made my stomach twist. I leaned forward. "What is it?" She hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "They aren't just struggling, sweetheart. They're in serious financial trouble. Bad enough that they could lose everything." I blinked. I had expected as much, but it was the way she said it, the weight in her voice, that unsettled me. "How bad?" She exhaled slowly. "Bad enough that they're being investigated for fraud." I stared at her, my mind racing. "Fraud?" She nodded. "Your dad made some risky financial moves. He over-leveraged their assets, took out loans he couldn't repay, and when things got desperate, well, he started moving money around where he shouldn't have. If the investigation goes through, they won't just be broke, Sam. They could be facing charges." I sat back, trying to process what I had just heard. My father, the same man who had spent years looking down on me, calling me irresponsible, a failure, was now at risk of losing everything. And suddenly, it all made sense. They hadn't called me because they missed me. They hadn't invited me to dinner to reconnect. They wanted me to bail them out. My stomach twisted with disgust. I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head. And they didn't think to mention that little detail. Aunt Linda gave me a look. "Did you really think they would?" I should have known. I should have seen it. This wasn't just about money. It was about desperation. My family wasn't just struggling. They were sinking. And now I had to decide. Was I going to let them drown? I sat there, staring at the steam rising from my coffee, letting Aunt Linda's words settle into the parts of me that had spent years trying to forget them. My parents were facing fraud charges. They weren't just broke. They were criminals. The weight of it hit me slowly, like an avalanche starting with a single shift in the snow before burying everything beneath it. Aunt Linda didn't say anything. She just let me process it, watching me with that same measured calm she'd always had. Finally, I let out a breath, shaking my head. "You know what the worst part is," I said, voice low. Even now, even with everything falling apart around them, they still couldn't admit they needed me. They still couldn't be honest. She sighed. "Pride is a dangerous thing, Sam. And your father," she hesitated, her lips pressing together. "Your father always saw asking for help as a weakness." I scoffed. "Except now, he has no choice." Aunt Linda stirred her tea, watching me carefully. "That's why I asked to meet you." She leaned in, lowering her voice slightly. "Sam, I know you. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But you also have power now." I frowned. "Power?" She nodded. "For the first time in your life, you have the upper hand. They need you, not the other way around." She gave me a look. "So what are you going to do with that power?" I stared at her, the weight of her words settling deep inside me. What was I going to do? I drove around for hours after leaving Aunt Linda, aimlessly moving through streets that used to feel like home, but now just felt like the past. The logical part of me knew what I should do. Walk away. Let them face the consequences of their own decisions. They didn't deserve my help. They didn't deserve anything from me. But there was another part of me, the part that had spent years craving their approval, that whispered, "What if you help them? What if this is your chance to finally make them see you?" I hated that voice. I parked outside a small diner, needing food, needing time to think. The moment I sat down, my phone buzzed. Another text, from Ethan this time. "Hey man, we need to talk. It's serious." I stared at the screen, gripping my phone a little tighter. Serious. That meant they knew. Maybe Aunt Linda had called them. Maybe the investigation was moving faster than they thought. Either way, they were panicking. And if Ethan was texting me instead of ignoring my existence like he had for the past 5 years, then I knew they were truly desperate. I typed out a response before I could stop myself. "Meet me at the diner on 7th. If my family wanted something from me, if they wanted to pretend we were suddenly close, suddenly loyal, suddenly family, then they were going to have to face me like adults. No more lies. No more manipulation. They wanted something, then it was time to see what they were willing to give in return." I sat in the diner, sipping my coffee, waiting. The place was mostly empty, just a few people scattered in booths, the low hum of conversation blending with the distant clatter of plates. My mind was already made up, but I needed to see Ethan's face when he asked for my help. I needed to hear him say the words. The bell over the door jingled, and there he was. Ethan, my brother, the one who had laughed the hardest when our parents called me a failure. He looked different now, tired, worn down. His usual cocky, confident presence was gone. He scanned the diner, spotted me, and walked over, sliding into the booth across from me. "Sam," he said, nodding slightly. I didn't nod back. I just leaned back, watching him, waiting. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Look, man, I know things between us haven't been great. A humorless laugh escaped him. Hell, that's an understatement. But we're in deep trouble. He glanced around, lowering his voice. Dad could be facing prison time. Mom could lose the house. Rachel, he hesitated, shaking his head. Rachel won't admit it, but she's drowning in debt. We need help. We need you. There it was, the words I never thought I'd hear. I tilted my head, studying him. And what do I get out of this? Ethan frowned. What? I shrugged. You want my help. You want my money. But let's be real, Ethan. If the roles were reversed, would you do the same for me? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We both knew the truth. He leaned forward, his voice desperate now. Sam, come on. We're family. I let out a short, sharp laugh. No. Family doesn't tear you down. Family doesn't make you feel worthless. Family doesn't suddenly show up when they need something. I placed my hands flat on the table. You all made it very clear who mattered in this family. And it was never me. Ethan's jaw clenched, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table. For a second, I thought he was going to argue, fight. But then, his shoulders slumped. He looked away. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I'm not heartless, Ethan. I don't want Mom to end up homeless. And I don't want Dad. I hesitated, choosing my words. I don't want him to ruin his life even more than he already has. So here's what I'm offering. Ethan looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. I'll buy the house. Mom can stay in it. But it belongs to me. No more financial disasters. No more bad investments. I held up a finger. And I'll pay for Rachel's student loans. Ethan exhaled, relief washing over his face. Sam, I cut him off. But that's it. Nothing for you. Nothing for Dad. The relief in his eyes vanished. What? I leaned in, my voice even. You two don't deserve it. Ethan's face twisted in frustration. You're just gonna let Dad go to prison? I shrugged. That's not my problem. He did this to himself. Silence stretched between us. Heavy. Final. Ethan swallowed hard, looking away. He knew he couldn't change my mind. And for the first time in his life, he had to accept it. He nodded once, pushing himself up from the booth. Guess that's it then. His voice was cold, bitter. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Yeah, I guess it is. I finalized everything within a week. The house was mine now. My mother would never have to worry about losing it. But she'd have to live with the fact that the son she had called a failure was now her landlord. Rachel's student loans were cleared. She didn't call to thank me. I didn't expect her to. As for my father, he went down with his own ship. The investigation turned into full-blown charges. He called me once, from an unknown number. I didn't pick up. I owed him nothing. Ethan stayed distant. I wasn't sure if it was out of shame or resentment. But either way, I was fine with it. We weren't brothers anymore. Maybe we never really were. For the first time in my life, I felt at peace. No more chasing their validation. No more hoping they'd see my worth. I had built myself from nothing, and I had done it without them. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my high-rise apartment, watching the city lights flicker below, my phone buzzed. It was Aunt Linda. I answered, smiling. She was the only real family I had left. She chuckled. So, how does it feel? I thought about it for a second. Then, with absolute certainty, I said, like freedom. And for the first time in my life, I meant it.
My family called me a failure. Now they want free stuff from my business. The first time my family ever showed up at my store, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, nothing about it was amusing, but because the irony of it all was so thick, I could practically choke on it. For years, they called me a failure, mocked me, told me I'd never amount to anything, that my little ideas were nothing more than childish fantasies. They had stood in my way at every turn, doubting, dismissing, belittling, ensuring that every step I took forward felt like trudging through quicksand. And now they were standing in front of my empire, smiling like they'd been my biggest supporters all along. I had always imagined this moment, but in my version, they at least had the decency to look ashamed. Instead, they strutted through the glass doors as if they owned the place, heads held high, their eyes scanning the luxurious interior like customers preparing to indulge. "Oh wow," Aunt Cheryl cooed, running her fingers along one of the premium displays. "I had no idea you were doing so well." Lies. They all knew. It wasn't like my success had been a quiet thing. My brand had exploded over the past 2 years, dominating social media, catching the attention of influencers, even landing me a feature in Forbes' 30 Under 30. The store they now stood in was the flagship location of my business. A sleek, modern space lined with custom-made shelves stocked with my best-selling products. Everything about it screamed accomplishment, from the minimalist gold-accented decor to the subtle scent of success wafting through the air, courtesy of the high-end fragrance line I had developed. They knew. They had always known. But now that it was undeniable, now that it was too big to ignore, they had decided it was time to reconnect. "Wow," my mother finally spoke, her voice carrying the same forced sweetness she used whenever she was about to manipulate someone. I'm so proud of you, honey. Look at all this." She gestured vaguely, as if the mere act of acknowledging my achievements somehow absolved her of the years she spent telling me I was destined to fail. I folded my arms, leaning against the sleek marble counter. "What do you want?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. Mom feigned a hurt expression, placing a dramatic hand over her chest. "Want? Can't a mother just come see her child's success?" A bitter chuckle escaped my lips. "A mother could, sure. But you? You only ever show up when you need something." That wiped the fake sympathy off her face. A beat of silence passed, and then my cousin Taylor, ever the opportunist, stepped forward with a wide grin. "Hey, listen, since we're family and all, do you think you could hook us up with a little, family discount?" And there it was. The real reason they had come. The true nature of their sudden interest in my success. Not to support me, not to make amends, but to reap the benefits of something they had never believed in, something they had actively tried to destroy. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch, let the weight of their audacity settle in the air. I watched as their smiles grew tight, their eyes shifting, their patience thinning as they waited for me to give in, to be the same desperate for approval person I once was. And then, I smiled. Not a warm, welcoming smile. No, this was the kind of smile that came with a loaded gun, the kind that promised retribution without ever having to fire a single shot. "I don't do discounts," I said smoothly, tilting my head. "But I'd be happy to sell you whatever you'd like. Full price, of course." Aunt Cheryl let out a breathy, incredulous laugh. "Oh, come on, sweetheart. Don't be like that. We're family." My jaw tightened. Family. Such an easy word to throw around when it was convenient. I had been called a lot of things by these people. A dreamer, a failure, a disappointment. Not once in all those years of struggle had they ever called me family. Not when I had to work 3 jobs to fund my startup. Not when I had to sleep in my car because I couldn't afford rent while investing everything into my business. Not when they ridiculed me at every family gathering, laughing at my ambition like it was some childish delusion. But now that I had something they wanted, now I was family. "I don't remember any of you being around when I was building this," I said, voice calm but edged with steel. "I don't remember any support when I was struggling. In fact, I do remember being told I was wasting my time, that I should get a real job." I glanced at my mother. "I believe you were the one who said that, right?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I was just trying to be realistic." "No," I countered. "You were trying to break me, and when that didn't work, you resorted to ridicule." I turned to Taylor. "And you? Weren't you the one who told everyone at Thanksgiving that my business was a joke? That I was playing entrepreneur?" Taylor had the audacity to shrug. "Well, yeah, but I didn't think you'd actually make it." The sheer gall of it almost made me laugh again. Almost. "Right." I exhaled sharply, pushing away from the counter. "Well, you all thought wrong. And now you're here acting like you've supported me all along, just so you can get free shit." I shook my head, amusement bleeding into something sharper. "That's not how this works." The tension in the room thickened. My mother's smile had disappeared entirely, replaced with a tight expression that I recognized all too well. The look she gave when she realized she couldn't manipulate her way into getting what she wanted. "You're really going to hold a grudge against your own family?" she asked, voice laced with disapproval. "After everything we've done for you?" I let out a slow breath, steadying the fury rising in my chest. "Everything you've done for me?" My voice was dangerously soft. "What exactly have you done for me?" She opened her mouth and shut it. Because she had no answer. Because the truth was, they had done nothing. Not 1 cent, not 1 word of encouragement, not 1 act of kindness, but they wanted to rewrite history now, wanted to pretend they had been there from the start, just so they could take advantage of my success. I could feel the weight of years of resentment pressing against my ribs, the memories of every insult, every belittling remark, every moment of doubt they had instilled in me. And yet, despite it all, I had still managed to build something extraordinary, not because of them, in spite of them. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. I met my mother's gaze head on. If you want something from me, you can pay for it. Just like everyone else. Her expression twisted with something ugly. You're ungrateful. No, I said, voice unwavering. I'm just done being used. And with that, I turned away, leaving them to choke on the bitter taste of their own hypocrisy. The bell above the door chimed again, a cruel echo of my family's lingering presence. They hadn't left yet. Of course they hadn't. People like them never accepted the first no. They saw it as an obstacle to be overcome, a temporary inconvenience rather than a definitive boundary. I didn't turn around. Instead, I busied myself at the register, pretending to be preoccupied with something important, reorganizing invoices, running my fingers over the cool metal of my tablet, anything to keep my mind from boiling over with the seething anger tightening my chest. You know, my mother started again, her voice laced with condescension. This attitude is exactly why we worried about you. You're so cold, so ungrateful for the people who raised you, who sacrificed for you. I exhaled sharply, a humorless laugh escaping before I could stop it. Sacrificed? That was rich. I turned slowly, meeting her gaze with an expression that didn't waver. You didn't raise me. You tolerated me. You didn't sacrifice anything. If anything, I was the one who spent my entire life trying to prove I was worthy of being in this family. I let my gaze drift across the room, landing on each of them in turn. My mother, Aunt Cheryl, my cousin Taylor. And yet, no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, it was never enough, was it? Silence. A beat of discomfort. I saw it in their eyes. The brief flicker of truth before they masked it with feigned indignation. Taylor, always the one to deflect, scoffed. Oh, come on. You're acting like we bullied you. We were just joking. You take things too seriously. A sharp, bitter taste coated my tongue. Joking. That was always the excuse. Years of belittling, mocking, dismissing, and when confronted, it was just a joke. You're too sensitive. You didn't bully me? I repeated, my voice deadly calm. Tell me, Taylor, do you remember my high school graduation? His expression flickered with something unreadable, but he recovered quickly. Yeah? What about it? I inhaled deeply, grounding myself before I let the storm raging inside me spill over. You stood on that stage, right before I walked up, and told everyone I'd be the first in the family to go bankrupt before 30. Taylor blinked, clearly searching for a defense. It was a joke. Was it a joke when you and your friends made a bet on how long I'd last before crawling back home? I cut in, my voice dangerously soft. A muscle in his jaw ticked. He had nothing to say to that. I turned to Aunt Cheryl. And you? Do you remember the old dinner party where you spent the entire evening telling me I was too dumb to run a business and should marry rich instead? Her face colored, her lips pursing in embarrassment. I never said that. Funny, I mused, because I remember it word for word, right down to the laughter that followed. I let my gaze slide back to my mother, the ringleader of them all. And you, Mom, I continued, my voice like a blade slicing through the air. Where do I even start? Maybe with the time you threw away my business plan and told me to grow up? Or the time you said I was an embarrassment to the family for not having a real career? Or better yet, I leaned forward slightly, my tone dropping into something even colder. Maybe we should talk about how you never once told me you were proud of me. Not when I got my first sale. Not when I made my first 6 figures. Not when I was featured in a national magazine. Not once. My mother's eyes hardened. I was trying to prepare you for the real world. No, I said, shaking my head. You were trying to make sure I failed. The silence that followed was suffocating. The weight of their hypocrisy, their years of cruelty hung thick in the air, pressing down on them like the walls were closing in. They had never expected me to fight back. Not like this. Not with cold, unwavering precision. I watched as realization dawned on their faces, the slow, creeping understanding that I wasn't the same person they had once dismissed. I wasn't desperate for their approval anymore. I wasn't seeking validation in places I would never find it. I was free. And that terrified them. Because without the ability to control me, without the power to manipulate my emotions, they had nothing. Aunt Cheryl cleared her throat, clearly attempting to salvage whatever dignity she had left. "Well, we didn't come here to argue," she said, her tone forced and tight. "We just wanted to show our support." I raised an eyebrow. "Support?" She nodded quickly. "Of course. You've done so well for yourself, and we just wanted to, celebrate that." "Lies. You wanted free stuff," I corrected. Taylor scoffed again, arms crossing over his chest. "Wow. You really think so little of us, huh?" I tilted my head, feigning contemplation. "I don't think little of you. I just think accurately." His lips pressed into a thin line. He had always been the most openly resentful of my success, the one who had gone out of his way to undermine me at every turn. I could see the irritation bubbling beneath the surface, the way his fingers twitched as if itching to throw out another insult, another jab meant to put me back in my place. But there was no place for me beneath them anymore. I straightened my spine, my decision already made. "You're not getting anything from me." The finality in my voice sent a ripple of tension through the air. Aunt Cheryl looked taken aback. "Nothing. Nothing," I repeated, unwavering. "Not a discount, not a favor, not a single cent." I let my gaze sweep over them once more, taking in the growing discomfort on their faces. "You don't get to mock me for years and then show up when it's convenient. You don't get to call me a failure and then try to profit off my success. And you sure as hell don't get to pretend you were ever in my corner when you were the ones trying to tear me down." I took a step back, crossing my arms. "So unless you're here to actually pay for something, at full price, there's the door." The moment stretched, thick and suffocating. For a second I thought my mother might lash out, might spit some cruel parting remark in an attempt to reclaim the upper hand. But she didn't, because deep down she knew. She had lost. Without another word, she turned sharply on her heel and strode toward the exit, her shoulders stiff with barely concealed fury. Aunt Cheryl followed, though not before casting me one final glance, one that teetered between resentment and reluctant admiration. Taylor lingered the longest. He stared at me, eyes dark, lips pressing into a tight line. And then, just as he reached the door, he muttered under his breath, "You think you're better than us now, huh?" I didn't flinch. I didn't waver. I simply met his gaze and said, "I always was." And with that, the door slammed shut behind them. The silence after they left was deafening. Not the kind of silence that brought peace, but the kind that settled thick in the air, pressing down like a storm waiting to break. I stood behind the counter, fingers gripping the cool marble surface as I stared at the door they had just walked through. They were gone, but their shadows still lingered. For years I had dreamed of this moment, the moment they would have to stand before me, not as superiors, not as voices of authority, but as beggars. And yet, the victory didn't feel as sweet as I had imagined. Not because I doubted my decision, not because I felt even the slightest bit guilty, but because I realized something. They had never mattered. Not really, not in the way I had let them. Their approval had been a mirage, a prize dangled before me that was never meant to be won. I had spent years chasing something that had never existed, years trying to prove myself to people who had no intention of ever seeing me as anything but a failure. And now, standing in the empire I had built without them, I saw the truth in its entirety. They had never held any real power over me. I had simply given it to them. Until now. A slow breath left my lips as I pushed away from the counter, rolling my shoulders as if shedding the last remnants of their presence from my skin. My employees, a carefully chosen team of people who had actually earned my trust, stood nearby, each one pretending not to have heard the explosive confrontation that had just taken place. Mia, my store manager and the closest thing I had to a real friend, cleared her throat. "You okay?" I turned to her, my lips curving into a slow, measured smile. Better than ever. And I meant it. I had spent so long waiting for an apology that would never come. for an acknowledgement of my worth that would never be given. But I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need them anymore. They had been weights around my ankles, dragging me down, convincing me I would drown without their approval. But I had cut the rope, and I was still standing. No, thriving. The storm came exactly as I had predicted. It started with a few passive-aggressive messages from extended family members, thinly veiled accusations about how I had disrespected my mother, how I had forgotten where I came from. Then came the Facebook posts, vague and dripping with carefully crafted victimhood, painting me as the ungrateful child who abandoned their family after getting rich. The audacity of it all would have been amusing if it weren't so predictable. They weren't angry because I had refused to give them anything. They were angry because they had no control over me. For years, I had played the part they assigned me, the failure, the disappointment, the one they could mock and belittle, because they assumed I would always be beneath them. But now, with the tables turned, they didn't know how to handle it. I ignored the messages, deleted the emails without reading them, let their words float in the wind, like dust kicked up in a storm, fleeting, meaningless, gone before they could ever touch me. Because I was untouchable now. It was almost laughable how quickly the narrative shifted. When they realized they couldn't guilt me into submission, they tried something else. Rewriting history. Suddenly my mother was so proud of me. Suddenly Aunt Cheryl was telling people that she had always believed in me, that she had supported me from the beginning. A carefully constructed lie, woven to preserve their own fragile egos. I saw the posts, the fake smiles, the forced nostalgia about how hard I work, and how amazing it is to see family succeed. It was all for show, a desperate attempt to erase the years of cruelty, to paint themselves as heroes instead of the villains they had always been. But the thing about rewriting history is that the past doesn't actually change. Only the people foolish enough to believe the new version do. I let them spin their stories, let them say whatever they needed to say to make themselves feel better. It didn't matter anymore, because I had already won. Success was a strange thing, not because of the wealth or the power or the recognition. I had expected all of that, had worked for it with the kind of determination that made failure impossible. No. What was strange about success was how quickly it revealed people's true natures. The ones who had doubted me, they either pretended they had always believed in me or resented me for proving them wrong. The ones who had stayed by my side, they celebrated with me, their loyalty unwavering, their joy in my success genuine. And the ones who had only ever seen me as a means to an end, they faded into the background, their voices growing quieter, their presence in my life nothing more than a distant memory. My mother had tried to reach out a few times. A text here, a voicemail there, each one carefully crafted to sound like concern, like regret. But I knew better. She didn't miss me. She missed the version of me she could control, and that version no longer existed. The store was bigger now. Not just this one, but the brand itself. What had once been a single passion project had turned into a multi-million-dollar empire, expanding into new cities, new countries, new heights I had only ever dreamed of. And me? I was still here, still standing, still building, but no longer looking over my shoulder. The past was behind me, buried where it belonged. I no longer needed validation from people who had never seen my worth in the first place. I no longer wasted energy on proving myself to ghosts. They had called me a failure. They had laughed at me, mocked me, dismissed me. And now, they were nothing more than echoes in a life I had outgrown. Success wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about realizing they had never mattered at all. And that, in the end, was the sweetest revenge of all.